Hi, everyone. I'm Ann Filippic with the White House Office of Public Engagement. You've just watched President Obama address a joint session of Congress at the U.S. Capitol. But don't go away, because we are live here at the White House. And we have a stage full of senior administration officials who are here, and they're eager to take your questions about the president's speech. We're going to be here for the next 45 minutes or so as part of a special edition of Open for Questions. So we'll be taking your questions in a few different ways tonight. To get started, I have a number of questions here that came in online during the president's speech. You can also submit your questions online now and throughout the evening. To do so, if you're on Twitter, you can just use the hashtag WHChat. You can also go to Facebook. Just post your questions on the White House page. That's at facebook.com/WhiteHouse. My colleague, Kevin Lewis, who's here, he's going to be watching for these throughout the night, and he's going to be selecting from your questions to include in our conversation this evening. And finally, you will notice this group here behind me. These guys just watched the president's speech from here at the White House, and we're going to be taking some of their questions too. So with that, we're going to go ahead and jump right into it, and we're going to introduce to you the policy experts. So Roberto, if you could take us away.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. My name is Roberto Rodriguez. I'm the Special Assistant to the President for Education here at the White House Domestic Policy Council.
Hi, I'm Portia Wu. I'm a Senior Policy Advisor for Mobility and Opportunity here at the White House. I work on labor issues.
My name is Brian Deese. I'm the Deputy Director of the National Economic Council here at the White House.
Hi, everyone. John Carson. I'm the Director of the Office of Public Engagement here at the White House.
Great. And Kevin, could you get us started with our first question?
Of course, if you're just joining us, you can send us your questions now on Twitter by replying to @WhiteHouse and using the hashtag WHChat. Okay, we have our first question here from Chris. Okay, panelists, what are the key parts of the president's proposal to get people back to work? And what compromises does the president offer to get these policies through Congress?
Well, why don't I'll take a first cut at that. You all heard the president's speech, so I'll be brief. The president outlined a set of ideas in 4 basic areas. First, provide tax cuts to small business, which create the majority of jobs in this country. His plan would cut the payroll tax cut in half for small businesses next year, and it would eliminate the payroll tax cut entirely for firms who raise wages for their current employees or who add new jobs. Second, tax relief to working families. What the president said tonight was, we not only need to continue the payroll tax relief that we've provided to 160 million families in this country this year, but we've got to expand it next year. Families over the course of this year have been hit by a number of headwinds: rising gas prices, rising food prices. They are struggling right now, and so we need to do better than leave this uncertainty about whether that tax cut is going to go away. We need to put $1,500 in the pockets of the typical family next year. Third, he talked about putting people back to work: teachers, veterans, the long-term unemployed, doing the work that we need to do to modernize and rebuild this country. He talked about repairing 35,000 schools, a third of the public schools in this country. He talked about concentrated efforts to look at these areas where we have the most foreclosures, which are dragging down property values and destroying communities, going in there and figuring out creative ways to put people to work rebuilding those communities. And he talked about repairing our roads, our bridges, our basic infrastructure. We have a real opportunity to both put people to work, particularly in the hard-hit construction sector, while at the same time increasing the competitiveness of our economy. And finally, the president talked about doing things particularly for those who are the hardest hit, those who are unemployed and who have been unemployed for long periods of time. He talked about extending unemployment insurance benefits, which we know is not only the right thing to do, it's the economically smart thing to do. But as we do that, to fundamentally reform how our unemployment insurance system works, to find new ways to get people back into the workforce and in good jobs. So those were the basic areas, and all of those areas are places where we can move right now. We know they'll create jobs, and to the end of the question, to Chris's question, in virtually all of these areas, these are ideas and these are concepts that Republicans and Democrats have supported. Some of them Republicans have come up with, some of them Democrats have come up with. This is the president's vision, but there is a lot of common ground here. And I think what you heard from him tonight, you heard it repeatedly, was let's get to work. Let's pass this bill. And if people have other ideas, then that's fine. But he's putting down his marker, and he's putting down a challenge to the Congress and to the American people that we can really get something done here.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Let's grab one from that came in via Facebook during the president's speech. This one came from Robin Dirkswager, and her question is, my understanding is that the majority of workers work for small businesses, not corporations. Do small businesses get the same level of tax breaks large corporations get? We heard the president talk a lot about small businesses tonight. Brian, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure, and I'll be brief. In the American Jobs Act, small businesses get more tax benefits than large businesses do, and that's a function of the economic circumstances we face. The questioner is right that small businesses create the majority of new jobs, but also as a function of the recession that we went through and the recovery that we're in, while large businesses have had an easier time accessing capital and repairing their own balance sheets after this recession. Small businesses are continuing to struggle. It's still very hard for small businesses to go out and get a line of credit or a home equity loan. And so targeting assistance to them means not only targeting it where most of the jobs are created, but also where the need is. So both of the tax benefits I just talked about, the reduction in payroll taxes by half for employers and the incremental credit for firms that raise wages or hire workers, both of them are targeted directly at the small businesses in this country that need our help the most and also where the greatest job creation potential is.
Great. Kevin, let's grab another one from online.
Of course. What do we have here? Okay, how about this from Jill Dosh? Are you willing to cut regulations to improve the economy? You are pretty popular here with the economic questions. Well, you know what? Let's actually hear from Portia.
I think you should hear from Portia.
On cutting regulations? Well, I think the president obviously has undertaken a broad initiative, and the administration has, to look at regulations that might hinder economic growth. At the same time, he's made very clear that it's important that we not be a country, as he just said, that's part of a race to the bottom, that we should have safe workplaces, more modern workplaces, and cleaner air and water. So I think that we understand this is a tough time, and a lot of things need close scrutiny, and he's willing to look at everything and consider all ideas.
That's excellent. Can we actually try someone from the audience this time?
That would be great. How about right here?
Hi, my name is Erin, and I'm in AmeriCorps Vista, and a lot of the work that we do is geared towards alleviating poverty. I know the economic recession has been especially hard on communities of color, and I was wondering if you could speak to President Obama's plan to address those communities. Thank you.
Can I take that one?
Yeah, go ahead, Portia.
I think that President Obama's plan is very important for communities of color, and I would say that you heard the president mention an initiative to help low-income families and workers in particular, and I think that both of these items are very important. Those are the groups that have really been hit hardest by the recession and are continuing to face long-term unemployment in disproportionate numbers. The president talked a little bit about initiatives, and it's going to be called sort of a Pathways to Work, which will include several components, building on successful initiatives in the Recovery Act to put people back to work. So that's summer jobs and year-round employment chances for young people in school and out of school. It's opportunities for low-income people to have work experience that's subsidized so they can get back into the workforce, and also some grant programs to really drive innovation at the local level. I think we're seeing in African American and Latino communities, as well as Native American and other communities, that there's a particular need for some of these initiatives. And I will say some of the tax pieces that Brian talked about, as well as the extending unemployment insurance benefits, will be very, very important to a lot of workers in these communities. One other piece I want to talk about is the president talked about the need to rebuild our nation and really invest in infrastructure. That's an incredibly important engine of economic growth. It's also important that traditionally disadvantaged communities have a chance at those jobs. And so one piece of of his proposal there is to have local hiring where possible, is to provide opportunities for minority-owned and disadvantaged businesses to participate in contracts, and to increase training for groups who traditionally haven't had as many of those infrastructure jobs.
Great, thanks, Portia. And here's a question that came in also during the president's speech, and it builds upon that. I think, Roberto, you might have something to add to this as well. This one it came in through whitehouse.gov from Andrea Morellis. She wrote, in President Obama's address this evening, he said that his plan will create jobs in America right now, is fair, and includes a focus on education. Where in this plan does it include first-generation and low-income students? And how does this plan provide poor families the opportunity to meet their responsibilities?
Great. Well, thanks for the question. You know, the president has really called upon us to all work together to really be a nation that's racing to the top. And that contest to really win the future begins in our classrooms. That really begins in our schools. So this plan directly addresses that by really making sure that our teachers can remain in the classroom, that they can be a resource for our students. We've seen real unprecedented budget cuts at the state level, and those have disproportionately impacted our teachers and education in a real way. The president made some aid available last year through the Education Jobs Fund. Working with Congress, we were able to make sure that we averted layoffs for over 110,000 teachers. Tonight, the president's plan, as he proposed, really would invest $30 billion to make sure that we're keeping our teachers on the job in America's classrooms. That's one of the most important things we can do for our first-generation college goers, for our first-generation students coming through school, alongside making sure that we're reforming our schools and we're doing more to improve the quality of instruction so that all of our students are reaching college and career readiness. He also has talked a bit more about the importance of modernizing our schools. And we know that it's hard for us to really be a nation that's racing to the top if our kids are learning in overcrowded classrooms, in crumbling schools, if they lack access to meaningful technology for learning, if they don't have science labs to really develop those sharp skills in science, engineering, technology, mathematics. So the president's plan tonight also proposes $30 billion to modernize America's schools. And there's a great need there. We know that our school buildings are, on average, 40 years old, if not older. And we have a backlog that exceeds $200 billion in terms of the needs in our schools for modernization. So we'll directly address that, and hopefully we'll have more of our young people learning in safe, well-equipped classrooms and having great teachers at the helm.
Great, thank you. Just a reminder to those that are just tuning in, if you are just joining us, you can submit your questions online right now. You can do that at Twitter by using the hashtag WHChat, or by posting your questions on our Facebook page, which is at facebook.com/whitehouse. Kevin, why don't we take another one from online?
Quick poll in the room. How many people here, how many of our guests are either recent grads or currently in college? Okay, for those of you who can't see this, it's just about everyone. So I have this great question here from Christopher Holland on Facebook. What is the president's plan to help students lower their debt, and get jobs sooner after college?
Well, you know, we appreciate that question as well. You know, I think the president's done a lot across our education reform agenda to make sure that we're doing more to open college pathways for more of our young people. We have a goal here that really is our North Star. It's our guiding light that the president has set for us to say by the year 2020, we want to be leading the world in terms of the highest proportion of college graduates. We know to get there, we not only need to be sure that we're providing the level of college aid to address affordability. We've shored up the Pell Grant, over $819 in additional Pell Grant aid in the maximum grant for our students, and we believe that's a real meaningful down payment on college. But we also know we need more on-ramps. We need more pathways for our young people to be able to enter college. and in particular for our young people who may be out of work or young people who may be graduated, don't have a pathway directly to college. So part of the plan that the President talked about tonight is to look at a new Pathways Fund that would support job training and integrated training and education for some of our young people who have already gotten out of high school, as well as for our adults, to be able to come back into the system. We're thinking how we can use community colleges as a real hub to provide this integrated set of education, job training, and skills development to really be able to enter the jobs of the future.
Thanks, Roberto. Kevin, what do you think? Another one from the audience?
Yeah, let's get one more from the
Okay.
audience. Yeah.
Rachel, can you grab over there?
How you doing? My name is William Levitt. I'm a senior at Cesar Chavez on Capitol Hill. And I have a two-part question. One, the president spoke of getting teachers back into the school, so I want to know, does the president feel it's the number of teachers that help educate students or the quality of teachers that help educate students?
Well, we think it's really important to have both. We really know that we're not going to be able to win the future if we're not moving forward with the number of teachers that we need to really make sure that all of our young people are reaching their full potential in the classroom. And today we're far behind that. You know, we are, as a nation, have over 200,000 fewer education jobs today than we did in 2008. And I think that's a symbol of how hard this Great Recession has hit our schools and our teachers and our education community. At the same time, we need to be sure that all of our teachers have the skills and the opportunities they need to grow those skills to be the best they can be in the classroom and to be effective. And we're also putting in place, independent of some of the pieces announced tonight, meaningful reforms across the country to make sure that we're supporting teacher effectiveness, we're doing more to measure teacher effectiveness and link that back to student learning, and we're providing all of our teachers every chance that they need to be able to be successful.
Thanks, Roberto. Let's get another one from Twitter. This one came in during the speech. It's from @JackANapes, Rusty G. And he wrote, is there a way for the government and the White House to foster job growth without more government debt?
Sure, I'll take a swing at that one. I think you heard a bit on this issue from the president tonight. I think that what the president's view is on that exact question is that there are some places where we need to use more of our resources to help jumpstart job growth. So if we're going to provide a short-term tax cut to our small businesses or help extend and expand tax relief to American families, that does have a short-term cost. If we do it in the context of a larger plan where we're not only paying for all of those measures over time, but we're actually doing more over the long term to help bring spending under control, then we can actually increase the effectiveness of that spending in the short run because we're providing more confidence that we're addressing our long-term needs. Separate from that, there are a whole set of things that the government can do, working with the private sector and on its own, to help support overall economic growth. I'll give you just a couple examples. One is the president set a very ambitious goal that we as a country should double our total exports by the year 2015. Our capacity as a country to grow is not just about what we consume here and what we produce here, but it's what we can make here and export all around the world. And can we take advantage of growing markets and growing market opportunities to actually create more jobs here and more opportunity here? That's a place where providing our businesses with more opportunities to explore foreign markets, reducing regulations that actually hamper our companies from actually exporting abroad. These kinds of measures can actually help open up new opportunities for our companies, which could help them grow and hire and expand. Another one that the president talked about today, the president set up a jobs council. He went out and got a broad cross-section of business leaders from across the country and asked them to come and help him think through ideas to help our economy. One of the ideas that they came up with, and that they've been working with us, but largely on their own too, was to challenge the private sector, major businesses as well as universities, to train 10,000 engineers. We don't have enough engineers in this country. That puts us at a competitive disadvantage. And that's in businesses' interest as well, because there's a lot of jobs where businesses need skilled engineers. That's a place where it's a smart idea, and just more collaboration between the public and private sector can do real good for our economy.
Thanks, Brian. Kevin, what are you seeing online?
You know, I appreciate everyone that's in the room right now. And I just want to reintroduce John Carson. This is one for you. We have Jay Smallwood, straight off of Twitter. White House chat, great proposals laid out on the table tonight. How can citizens help the White House overcome partisanship? Hashtag pass this bill.
Excellent. Thank you, Jay. And on behalf of the President, I want to ask everyone in this room tonight, everyone who is watching online, to be a part of this effort to get the American Jobs Act passed. I think there are some concrete things that you can do to make this happen. First, get informed. Follow on whitehouse.gov. There's going to be a lot of fact sheets. There's going to be a lot of information. Take the time to read up on what's at stake here, what the President is proposing. And second, figure out how to tell this story in your community, where you live, the networks that you talk to. You know, the President laid out a bold vision here, but tell the story of how this is going to take the school in your community that is crumbling and give your students a better education, put people back to work in your community. Tell the story. If you're a veteran, tell your fellow vets what this proposal would mean to help get returning our soldiers returning from Iraq and Afghanistan back to work. We need you to think of every means of communication you possibly can to lay this clear contrast out for everyone. If you have a blog, write a blog. If you tweet, tweet about it. You cannot underestimate the incredible importance of every one of you explaining to your communities, to your networks, what the American Jobs Act would mean for them, and that Congress needs to pass it now. In fact, sometimes when you're organizing around these issues, it can seem like your voice doesn't matter, but the reality is building the support behind this across the country is the only thing that's going to get it done. So we need your help. Follow us along at whitehouse.gov, and we're ready to get this passed with you.
Thanks, John. I think we're going to take another question from the audience. First, again, just a reminder to anyone that's just joining us, if you have a question, you can submit it online. Kevin here is taking a look at Twitter and Facebook and pulling questions for the conversation. Through Twitter, you can use the hashtag WHChat. You can also submit via Facebook. That's facebook.com/White House. So let's get a question over here. Ronnie, how about right here?
My name is Sean. I'm a college student from Southern California. My question is, how much will this bill cost? And also, what economic assumptions were made when you figured out how much it would cost?
Sure. That's a great question. Sometimes people aren't as interested in the details, and I am interested in the details. To John's point, if you go on our website now, there is comprehensive information about this bill. And shortly, early next week, we'll actually be sending legislation up to the Hill so that they can pass this bill. The total cost of this package is just under $450 billion, $447 to be exact. That is broken down between the components that I talked about earlier. But a couple points about the economic assumptions. One, the most important is that the bill is fully paid for, so it will not add a dime to the deficit. Now, sometimes when you say that, people will say, but if you put a bunch of money out into the economy and then you cut a bunch of money at the same time, isn't that going to have an offsetting effect? And what's really important right now to understand is that what we want to do with this bill is provide additional support in the short term while providing additional deficit reduction in the long term. It's the right package for our economy right now, because right now our economy is not growing as fast as it needs to in the short term, but we do over the long term have a deficit problem that we have to deal with. And if we're able to tackle both, at the same time, then both will have a more meaningful effect on our economy. So the cost in the short term is real, but that's where you get the bang for the economy. And if we can pay for it over time, then we'll have the greatest impact. In terms of the assumptions that went into it, we've worked for quite some time now, looking at different proposals, analyzing them, going back and forth, responding to questions that the president had. And one of the things that happens when you have to put together actual legislation to put it down in front of Congress to pass is you've got to do a bunch of crossing your T's and dotting your I's. So each one of these proposals has been closely analyzed by our Office of Management and Budget, most of whom sit in this building that you're all in, and our Treasury Department on the tax side. And they're all buttoned up and ready to go, which is why we're ready to pass this bill.
Thanks, Brian. Here's another good one. This came in via Facebook from Daniel Buke, and he writes, according to statistical trends, productivity has increased, yet income and wages have declined dramatically. Why is this the case, and what can we do to change this? I think, Brian, this one might be for you.
Well, the question points to one of the central economic challenges that we face, which is one that is also very intuitive to the American people, which is that while we are facing a tough recovery from what was a brutal economic crisis, the economic challenges that we face are more deeply rooted. And so if you look back over the prior decade, even before we got into the crisis and the financial system froze up and we experienced those many months of really incredible uncertainty on the edge of going into a Great Depression at the end of 2008, the beginning of 2009. For years before that, we faced a situation where median wages in this country were falling. We went through the first expansion on record since World War II, where during a business cycle, workers' wages actually fell. And so we have a larger set of challenges about how can we create economic growth that actually is shared by the broad middle class in this country. And that's why you heard the president tonight, and really you've heard it's a central animating force of the president's his presidency and why he does what he does is we need to have a broader strategy to create that kind of shared growth. And that means that's part of the reason why the president took on health reform, even though it was a difficult thing to do, and why the health reform bill is so important, because if we can bring down health care costs, we can make sure that people get more of their compensation in wages rather than having health care eat up a larger and larger amount. It's why he's focused on a 21st century education system, as Roberto was talking about, because at the end of the day, having a strong and educated workforce is going to be the key to competing in an increasingly global economic environment. So the president's economic strategy is focused on a set of things we need to do right now, and that's what the American Jobs Act is all about. But the task that we have at hand is much broader. So we need to pass this bill. We need to get the rate of growth, economic growth and job growth up in the short term, but we have a lot of additional work to do as well.
Brian, can I add a kind of non-economic or different kind of economic point to that? I think also the president has mentioned in recent days the importance of workers having a voice on the job and the ability to negotiate on a fair and even playing field for better salaries and better and safer working conditions through collective bargaining and elsewhere. And the president has also talked about problems of discrimination against the unemployed and people who have been out of work for a long time now having trouble getting back in the workforce. And he feels like that kind of unfairness is something that undercuts us, it impedes our economic growth and growth of workers' wages, and something that hurts all of us.
Thanks, Portia. Just to let folks know at home, if you submitted a question and we haven't gotten to it yet, we are still going to be taking a number of questions this evening. But I want you to know that throughout the next couple days, administration officials are going to be continuing this conversation at whitehouse.gov. So you can continue to submit your questions there. You can also follow the White House Twitter account, which is @WhiteHouse. And you can get updates and information there as well. With that, Kevin, let's get another question from online.
Okay, from Twitter, hashtag White House Chat, WHChat. What role does organized labor play in assisting economic recovery?
I guess I'll take that one. I think you heard the president talk about the important balance in these proposals and many of the things that he laid out, particularly investing in infrastructure, our highways, our roads, modernizing our schools, bringing teachers back on the job. I think organized labor has a very important role to play in supporting proposals like this that will clearly lead to hundreds of thousands of new jobs in our country and provide an important economic boost. Organized labor, I think, has played a role also in trying to help people get through these tough times. Organizing and collective bargaining is one way. Sometimes workers get together and decide they'll all take a small pay cut to save everyone's job. So they're an absolutely critical player at the table, a player to sort of represent workers' interests and be a partner with business to figure out how we can grow our economy and create more jobs. I think everybody really shares an interest in doing that.
Thanks, Portia. Here's one from whitehouse.gov from Bob Chamberlain. He asks, we hear a lot that small business is the engine that drives the nation's economy. However, the nonprofit sector plays a critical role with the local communities they serve. How is the president's plan going to help support this key component of our community? John, do you want to take that one?
Yes, that is a question that we heard a lot in the lead up to the president's speech. The role nonprofits play, especially at a difficult economic time like this in communities across the country, is absolutely crucial. That was recognized, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but the small business tax cut that the president mentioned that will help those small businesses also applies to nonprofits. In addition, things like the $15 billion that's included for Project Rebuild to the school modernization, nonprofits are going to play an absolutely crucial role in explaining to people in communities across the country what this plan is about. And when we pass this plan, whether it be helping rural schools apply for grants, disadvantaged communities in urban areas understand how to take advantage of this opportunity and rebuild their community, nonprofits are going to play an absolutely crucial role on that end as well.
Thanks, John. Anyone else have anything to add?
John, if I could add to that, I think, our nonprofit community-based organizations are often such important hubs in our communities for families and for kids to come to access services and support. I want to just make a note in terms of the education funding that the president talked about tonight to prevent layoffs and to rehire our teachers. That also applies for our early childhood educators. So many of our early childhood teachers that are in our nonprofits and our center-based programs in local communities really helping kids in their most formative years get a head start. There will be some relief there as well directly to help them make sure that they stay on the job and to bring more teachers back into that setting.
Thanks, Roberto. Let's get another question from here. Rachel, how about right here in the back? And let us know your name along with your question.
My name is Malik Hawkins. I go to Cesar Chavez Public Charter School for Public Policy, and I'm a singer. So I heard that the president was talking about rebuilding the public schools and stuff. But I was wondering, is he planning on fixing like the curriculums in schools, because it's not like where you go, but what you're learning there. So is he planning on rebuilding that?
Absolutely. I think it's one of the president's top priorities in education is to really retool our entire education system so that it is calibrated around one clear goal of college and career readiness for all of our students. And that means we need to do a better job of raising standards in our country. We have too many states that actually have had a race to the bottom with respect to their standards instead of a race to the top. So in order to become internationally competitive, we have to do a better job there, and we also have to do a better job of improving the curriculum. One of the most important areas we can do that is in science and in mathematics, and in really helping our young people use technology in the classroom to really unleash a whole new set of learning technologies and a whole new way of teaching. And we need to have modern schools that are going to be able to do that. We need schools of the 21st century to be able to really reach that goal. That dovetails directly with what the president has talked about tonight. We know we need to do a better job of equipping our schools with science labs and with the educational technologies that they'll need to be able to actually teach that advanced curriculum. That's something that we're really going to try to promote through this modernization fund, and will continue to support through the president's education reforms.
I like this question a lot because it's about what we as citizens can do in regards to what the president was talking about tonight. This came in through whitehouse.gov. Judith Kavanda, she asked, what can we, the citizens, do that we haven't done before to help America with job recovery? Who wants to take that one? John?
Well, you can pass the American Jobs Act. And just to expand on that for a moment, this is a moment, I think, not just to pass this bill and get Americans back to work, but for communities across the country to come together, to organize, find those unusual allies in your community who can help highlight what this bill what this plan would do in your community. Build that organization, create those unusual alliances, and then keep working together. We've seen in some of the fights that we've had over the last 2 years, people come together to pass the Affordable Care Act who are still working together in their communities. Organizations like Young Invincibles, who are here tonight, who came together around other fights, who are now making their community better every day. So find those people in your community, your online network, who are going to organize with you to make your voices heard and demand passage of the American Jobs Act, and then keep working together to come up with creative ideas in your own community.
Guys, I think we're on our lightning round now, okay?
Can't wait.
That means 2 minutes or under. Straight to the people. Okay, I'm on Twitter. There's so many great questions, and I want to try to get as many as possible in. Okay, this one's for you, Dees. 2 minutes.
I'm ready.
All right, here we go. This is from at Plantis. At Plantis, do spending cuts have the same sort of effect on the debt as revenue increases? What's the difference?
It's a good question. In very technical terms, you can reduce the deficit in 2 ways. You can either reduce by $1 the amount that the government spends out, or you can increase by $1 the amount that the government takes in revenue. But obviously, the type of spending and the type of revenue that you choose makes a big difference economically in terms of what the impact will be for economic growth and what the impact will be ultimately for the deficit. So again, just to go back very briefly to the basic strategy that the president outlined, which is that we have to do more in the short term. We have to get job growth going more in the short term. And we have to couple that with some tough spending discipline and some decisions about revenue increases, particularly for the highest income Americans over the long term. That's the right economic strategy. That's what's embodied in this plan, and I think that that's the right approach.
If you're looking for the economic plan from the president in less than 2 minutes, there it is. Let's have another one from the audience.
Yeah, and just a reminder to folks, we have just time for a few more questions. So if you're at home and you have that question you want to submit, again, you can do it through Twitter at WHChat. You can also do it through Facebook at the White House page. So let's get right here.
With youth unemployment, so like double the national average, one of the programs and one of the themes tonight was, ideas that have been both Democratic and Republican, and I think one is AmeriCorps, Senior Corps, and National Service broadly. And my question is, how can the president, how can we as citizens who support programs that not only hire or have 500,000 people applying for 4,000 slots, going into schools and tutoring kids, rebuilding after natural disasters, really solving a lot of issues that need to be solved anyway, and at the same time providing those jobs to people that just graduated from college and need to get that first job to get their skill set so that they're not unemployed after that. How do we support programs that work like AmeriCorps and Senior Corps and help the president fight for them like he did by passing the bipartisan Kennedy Serve America Act? How do we get that funded?
This is just one of those moments in history where this country is going to can go in two very different directions. And the president has laid out the American Jobs Act that is a clear, concrete vision. People can understand what it'll do in its community. But I want to encourage all of you to engage in this, become part of this effort to make your voices heard on this. But while you're doing that, get informed on everything else that's going on. You mentioned AmeriCorps, Teach for America. All of these are programs that are supported by the Corporation for National and Community Service. We have this effort to pass the American Jobs Act, but as many of you know, there's lots of other things going on at the same time. The Republican proposal in Congress is to eliminate the entire Corporation for National and Community Service, which would take away all the funding for these incredibly important programs at this time. As you're engaging people in your networks, in your communities, young people across the country, explain what the American Jobs Act would do, but tie it together with these other things that are going on. Use this opportunity not just to help us get this passed, but to get organized, to get creative, and bring more people into civic engagement. It's both the challenge that we need to meet right now, but it's the opportunity as well.
Here's a question I think it's important to ask because I think we can clarify for some folks and clear up some questions out there. This one came through on Facebook from Heidi Eisenheim, and she says, a bit skeptically, she says, "We still haven't paid for the last stimulus. Why should Americans agree to another stimulus that's supposed to fix the exact same problems the last one was supposed to fix?" Brian, can you talk to that one?
Sure, and I will. I'll do it quickly. First, I don't think the American people should accept the American Jobs Act if it doesn't come with credible measures that pay for it 100% over the long term. And that's why the president's going to put forward a plan to do exactly that. Second, the Recovery Act was incredibly successful at breaking the back of what was a brutal recession. We did not know at the time, and virtually every economist in the country did not understand at the time just how terrible this recession was, just how strong the contraction was. We lost 8 million jobs in the period just before the president came into office and just after he came out of office. Digging out of that hole is hard. The Recovery Act, the steps the president took to stabilize the financial system, to save the American auto industry, were all crucially important in keeping us from going into a Great Depression. But this is hard. We have a big hole to dig out of, and we need to do more. So I think it's right for the American people to demand that we get this right. And one of the ways we need to get this right is to do more for jobs in the short term. We have to pay for it over the long term. That's what this plan would do.
Okay, continuing our lightning round. I have a question from My Brooklyn Report. Okay, what policy initiatives will be in the jobs bill for special job placement emphasis on communities who've experienced far worse under this economy?
I think the question might be a little similar to one we heard earlier about what's happening in disadvantaged communities. And I know there are a couple pieces that are in the President's Jobs Plan that are worth highlighting. First of all, the Pathways to Work Fund, which puts money down to the states and local areas, is based on, the money is going to go where the unemployment is worst. So that's where these new jobs, subsidized employment, opportunities for young people in the summer and during the year, and also opportunities for states and localities to try creative new things, to put lower income people back to work. That's where that money is going to go. It's really going to target those communities, as well as some of the pieces I talked about earlier with transportation infrastructure, and also with the Neighborhood Stabilization Fund, investments in communities where there have been high levels of home foreclosure and there maybe a lot of abandoned buildings. That's ways of both creating jobs and trying to improve neighborhoods and improve communities.
Excellent, thank you.
I want to be sure to get at least one more question from the audience. How about in the back, Ronnie?
Hello, I'm Jorge Hilar with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute. Should this act pass, 35,000 public schools will undergo reparations and renovations. But I'm curious to know, and I think, Ms. Wu, you touched base that the money was going to go to unemployment and such. Would it be that the money will go to the schools with the least and with the lowest education, or with the worst infrastructure and the ones that need the most reparations?
Well, thanks, Jorge. You know, it's important that we really get this relief out for school modernization across the country. And so the president's plan would prioritize getting these dollars down quickly, first and foremost, to our cities. And then would also make sure that our states have some flexibility to be able to prioritize urgent projects and projects that are backlogged, that are long overdue, and would give them some ability to also prioritize projects in a number of our rural communities and rural areas where there are long overdue needs around school modernization. So the answer is there will be dollars that will really go out across the country. Ultimately, we'll see dollars to a large proportion, almost 95% of our school districts, and there'll be an opportunity for those districts to really prioritize those dollars to the projects that really need them the most.
Great. Kevin, let's get another one from online.
Yes, of course. This one's coming straight from whitehouse.gov. What is the administration proposing to help people who are upside down on their homes?
I can take that quickly. What I will say is that one thing that you heard the president say today was that he is going to work administratively to this question of what we can do without Congress on our own. He's going to work with the federal housing agencies to try to give more homeowners the opportunity to refinance into a lower interest rate mortgage. One of the things we have going on today is we have historically low interest rates. I don't know how many of their college students are also homeowners in this audience, but maybe out in the online. But we have historically low interest rates, just above 4%, but there are a lot of reasons why people aren't taking advantage of that. For people, particularly those who've lost equity in their home or who they are underwater, which means that the value of their mortgage actually exceeds the value of their home. Allowing people to refinance into lower interest rates lowers their monthly payment, so it gives them some relief, money in their pocket, but it also increases the likelihood that they can actually stay in their home because if those payments get overwhelming, then they may be in a position where they can no longer stay. So this is, again, one of these common sense ideas. We can make progress administratively, and the president's going to do that. The president's going to keep trying to find places like this where he can make progress, he can do things, and while John and everybody else is saying go and pass this Americans Jobs Act, we're going to keep looking for places where we can provide relief without Congress as well.
Can I grab one more from Twitter? Thank you. Okay, this one is from Savani Yastanti. What can we do individually to help jumpstart the volunteer before hiring initiative in our states? Don't everyone jump in at one time.
Well, I think the questioner may have stumped the panel. I'm not familiar with the Volunteer Before Hiring Initiative.
I think they're referring to our Pathways to Work proposal, flexibility on UI.
That may be.
I'd be happy to take. Let's construe the question to mean that. That's because I've been eager to talk about that proposal. The president did mention in his speech that we're going to include in this plan some really innovative reforms to the unemployment insurance system. Some of the biggest reforms we've seen in 40 years, really trying to make that system a reemployment system. There are some states, and he named Georgia, but there are many others who are doing this, have used their unemployment systems to provide an opportunity for people to get short-term training and hopefully with a move into permanent employment. And we're creating a fund, the Reemployment Now Fund, that would encourage states to look at that practice, lots of other practices, intensive reemployment services, counseling, career help, skills brush up, as well as ideas like, we're going to call it a bridge to work, where people would have the opportunity to work for a short time at a potential new employer that gives someone who's been out of work for a long time, this would be for long-term unemployed, a chance to get back in the game, brush up their skills, show an employer what they can do. That's what a lot of long-term unemployed are saying, is just give me a chance, I need a shot. And so this would provide that. It would give employers a chance to bring people on, even as they're nervous about hiring, with some financial support from the UI program. So it's an experimental idea, but one we think shows a lot of promise. And so I think the question was, how can we help? You know, this will be carried out at the state level, so people should talk with folks in their states if they're interested.
Thanks,
Okay,
question.
it sounds like we're about 50 minutes in. How many questions?
I think we have
do you
time for one last question.
One last question. Okay,
And
here we
Kevin,
go.
if it's okay with you, I think we should do it from here in the audience.
This is a great audience. Let's go.
These guys, okay. How about right over here?
Hi, my name is Samantha Zwirling, and I'm from the University of Maryland. And I was just wondering if there's anything in the president's plan for green infrastructure to create American jobs and clean American energy.
It's that's a great question. The short answer is yes, and there are a couple of places where that's the case. First, you've heard Roberto and a number of us talk about the effort to modernize at least 35,000 schools. One of the key investments that we can make in our schools is to actually improve the energy efficiency of the schools. It's a win on a number of levels. It reduces energy costs for school systems, so it brings down costs. It actually improves the health of a school environment. And it puts people to work immediately. You heard the president talk today about people putting in more energy efficient insulation and windows into schools. Those are jobs that are well suited to people who are unemployed, particularly in the construction industry. Another place where there's a real opportunity to do that is in what the president talked about, creating an infrastructure fund. Some people refer to this as an infrastructure bank, where you prioritize projects of national significance. You get away from the sort of earmarking and the traditional way of funding infrastructure. And some of those projects of national significance are ones that focus on our clean energy infrastructure and our energy infrastructure. And so if we could get that bank in place, which is a proposal that has bipartisan support and really a growing bipartisan support, that would provide a platform to support those kinds of projects at a national level as well.
If I could just break the 2-minute rule for a second. One other key area, well, just one other quick thing is I think the investment in transit in our cities is going to be a crucial investment as well. But here's the thing. The President laid out his vision tonight, the American Jobs Act. The House Republicans, Majority Leader Cantor, laid out their vision for job creation about a week and a half ago. And it was primarily rolling back protections that Americans enjoy to protect clean air, clean water, workplace safety. So we'd ask you to lay out this contrast, a vision for putting people back to work and rolling back protections to levels we haven't seen since before we had the Clean Air and Clean Water Act.
Thanks, John. All right, with that, I think that's all we have time for. We could go on for a while. I want to say thanks to our panel. Thank you, guys. Thanks to Kevin, co-moderator, and to our great audience, and most of all to everyone tuning in from home. We really appreciate you being part of this conversation. Just a reminder that if we didn't have time to get to your question tonight, never fear, you still have the opportunity to participate in the conversation online at whitehouse.gov over the next few days. Again, you can follow the White House Twitter account, which is @WhiteHouse. You can go to whitehouse.gov and keep in touch for updates as we go forward. Thanks so much for joining tonight.